faith differently, of course, in every nation, in every national context. And that human society, in turn, is embedded in Earth and the living world. It is part of life. We are part of nature, and we are utterly dependent upon her provision of a stable climate and thriving biodiversity and these life-supporting systems. We're drawing in materials and matter from Earth into our economy, transforming them and putting out waste and pollution. And we are bathed in a river of solar energy. So this diagram aims to make visible from day one the energy and material through flow of the economy that makes the economy work and is essential to ensure that we design economies that are compatible with living in harmony with healthy Earth. But also inside the economy, yes, there is the market and there is the state. And these two became, certainly in my experience, a 20th century ideological boxing match of, are you for free market, laissez-faire capitalism or state-loving socialism? And this boxing match, this fight between the market and the state, dominated the economists' view and meant that we disregarded two other fundamental ways in which we provision for our needs and wants. The household, where we all begin every day with the unpaid caring work, the cooking, washing, cleaning, sweeping, of reproducing labor, of raising a generation, but the care at the heart of the home that makes life work. And the commons, where people come together, not through the market or the state, but as a community, creating shared rules and values around stewarding a shared resource. So recognizing that healthy economies make space for the unique attributes of household care, of the commons, of the market, of the state. I know I wouldn't want to live in a society that lacked any one of these forms of provisioning. And finance, which is there shown in the center as financial flows, should be in service to these forms of provisioning. Finance in service to an economy, in service to life, would be a very, very different form of finance and financial system than the one we've inherited today. So if that's a big picture, what about the dynamics? Rather than pursuing the dynamics of growth for its own sake, I want to call on two fundamental dynamics that I believe should be at the heart of 21st century economies. We've inherited linear degenerative economies. The industrial systems, especially coming from the global north, are linear degenerative: take, make, use, lose. We take Earth's materials, make them into stuff we want, use it for a while and throw it away. That is what is running down Earth's life-supporting systems and pushing us over planetary boundaries. We need to bend those linear arrows into circular, cyclical, regenerative ones so that we create systems that work with and within the cycles of the living world, separating biological materials, Earth's own materials onto the one hand, and technical materials, anything that's transformed by humans like plastics, metals, ceramics, fibers, that we need to mimic nature's cycles by repairing and sharing and refurbishing and reusing and recycling. Some examples I want to bring, and I'm going to bring examples from urban context because I'm going to be talking about cities and urban transformation. Some examples just from very different contexts around the world of moving towards urban regenerative design, whether it's eco-construction here in Uttarakhand, showing a house made entirely from locally available materials, whether it's the fly ash waste from an industry or local timbers, building with the materials of place. And then sitting next to that, circular construction in the city of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. This is a district in Amsterdam where the local government has said everything that's built here must be circular, in the sense that the materials cannot be cemented and glued together. They must be usable and reusable so that they could be disassembled and reused. And the materials have a material passport so that anybody using them knows what those materials are, where they have been, what they can future be used to create. Underneath this, retrofit and renovation in Baltimore in the US. As many people say, the best buildings are the ones that already exist, certainly in the global north. How can we retrofit these and insulate and upgrade them so that you are bringing in human labor rather than using more energy and materials? And then also recognizing the infrastructural context in which cities are built. One example of a sponge city from Jinhua in China, recognizing that whether due to the floodplain or due to the need for climate change adaptation, the water will be moving in around the city? How do we build infrastructures that absorb and recognize the movement of water so that we are resilient in urban city settings? Now, I've just shown 4 examples. I'm sure that you could bring many, many more, and I would love to learn of some examples from Pakistan of initiatives like this, bringing regenerative urban design, but also in many other sectors. I just focused here. I want to move to one more rural focused area, which is in the community of Hawaii. Amazing work that's been led by Kamana Bima, who is an indigenous knowledge scholar there, who recognized that this concept of the circular economy was being brought to Hawaii. And he said, but we have an ancestral circular economy here. This is how we always did things. And I think this resonates in many parts of the world. So this diagram you can see at the center in the dark blue outer layer is recognizing the qualities and inspirations, the patterns, the knowledge of the ancestral circular economy. And they are working to combine that with now these kind of more universal incoming circular economy policy goals to create their own blend of the two, Aina Aloha economic futures. So bringing together the two, saying we will not have circular economy concepts imposed upon us from outside. We lived as this before we were colonized. We will return to the roots that we know and blend that with and get the best of both of these worlds. So I find this a very inspiring approach to reclaiming that circular economy concept and rerouting it in indigenous knowledge that's still being practiced and being regenerated locally. Along with the need to move from degenerative to regenerative, the second dynamic I want to speak of is recognizing that we inherit deeply divisive economies worldwide that tend to capture opportunity and value in the hands of a few, whether that's through what some call the coding of capital, through infrastructure, through regulation, legislation, through privilege, through inheritance. We have seen the rise of a 1%, often nationally and also globally. The number of billionaires in the world has doubled in the last decade, from 1,000 billionaires to 2,000 billionaires. But even within nations, many nations are seeing a wider inequality emerging. There's no chance that humanity can thrive in the donut, either nationally or globally, in such a profoundly unequal world. And so we need to move from divisive economies to far more distributive ones, described here as those that share opportunity and value with all who co-create it, which ultimately turns out to be the whole of society. We are entangled in value, in every interconnection. And we need to move from systems that tend to extract and capture value for the few who already have, towards systems that spread and share that value and create a thriving whole, just as nature does. Some examples, again, I'm going to move back towards urban design, looking at distributive concepts. These half houses in Chile were designed by the architect Alejandro Aravena. He realized that many people in Chile could never afford to buy a house. They would never be able to put down the down payment and make all those payments, but they could afford half a house. And so he literally started designing half houses with all the plumbing, the water, the heating that you needed, with that space on the side that you could fill in. Once you have earned and saved, you can literally fill in the second half. Here are some examples of half houses that have been filled in. So it opens up the ownership of housing to a whole swathe of society who otherwise would never have imagined themselves getting out of the rental market and getting access to home ownership. Also here on the top is community-led redevelopment in the so-called slums of Bangkok. This is a program called Ban Mangkong, where the government of Thailand worked together with slum dwellers, giving them community-led redesign of their the places they lived, giving them grants and loans to develop housing that met their community's needs. So this is very much, rather than gentrification and moving people out, it's redesigning exactly with and for the community of that place and massively improving the quality of their living conditions in the process. Below, I'm showing 2 examples of infrastructures. Rapid transit. Curitiba in Brazil was one of the first places to pioneer dedicated bus lanes that are the fastest, cheapest, best, smartest way to travel long distances for those who have to commute from outside of the city center into the center. And this example from Curitiba has inspired bus dedicated transport around the world. And then in the US, that country that I show that has very high levels of inequality, many marginalized communities saying, how do we benefit from the energy revolution that we know needs to happen? The solar cooperatives in Cleveland, in Ohio, are led by traditionally marginalized Black American communities, putting them at the heart of the skills and the new skills to bring about the solar revolution that the city is creating. So again, these are just 4 examples of what I would term more distributive design, where the value that's created is shared far more equitably with everybody involved. It creates a far more equitable society through this redesign. So I've talked about moving from degenerative to regenerative, from divisive to distributive design. And let's put that in context. I think we've moved a long way. This is the 20th century economics that I was taught, and I believe still very strongly shapes a whole generation of economists and thinkers and politicians who may be my age worldwide, bringing in these concepts. We need to move far beyond this, and fast, to a world in which the starting point recognizes the economy is in society in the living world. That's the foundation of ecological economics, that recognizes that humanity is part of the web of life and utterly dependent upon it, and that has a goal, whether you use the donut or not. The donut is one way of expressing it, but a goal that aims to meet the human rights and the needs of all people while living within the life support systems of this only known delicately balanced living planet. So for me, this is the beginning of 21st century economics. And this is a very quick overview of some of the core concepts in donut economics. Then what gets exciting is when people say, well, how can we do this? What would it mean to actually start putting this into practice? And one of the places where this question first came from was from cities, towns, districts, regions, so local government. And they asked, could we use the concept where we are? How could we do that? And so let me very quickly talk you through the concept and give you a few examples. And I'm delighted to see that Dr. Jamila Mahmood is now with us, and she will be able to talk more specifically to the work they're doing in Malaysia. Welcome, Jamila. So first of all, to use the donut, we unroll it. We make some space between the social foundation and that ecological ceiling. And there's a little question in there, which is really a very big question. How can our city or town or district become a home to thriving people in a thriving place, while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? That's a big, complex question. So we divide it up into what we call the 4 lenses, looking locally at how we live well here. What do we aspire to as a good life here? But also globally, recognizing that we have responsibilities for people and places beyond here for the impact that we may have upon them. So let me run through each one of these quickly. We start with this question, which is usually the local question. How can everyone in our city or our place thrive? What would it mean across all of these social dimensions that we see at the bottom of the screen, from food, water, health, education, housing, energy? What would it mean in each of these in your locality to say that everybody has their claim to that social foundation of well-being? What is that level of well-being below which no one should fall? Who is currently falling below that? What policies can we put into place here to ensure that they come above it? So this is a very strong, familiar local question. Let's add to it a local ecological question, which says, how can our city be as generous as the wildland next door? Now, this recognizes that nature in every location on Earth has a genius of being generous. Nature stores carbon for us in the forests. She welcomes and holds wildlife. She cycles the water and provides fresh water. She harvests energy through her leaves. She enhances our well-being. She cools the air from the treetops to the forest floor on a hot day. Nature is continually generous, and we rely on these generosities for health, but also for resilience to climate impacts. So how can we design cities and urban settlements that aim to be as generous as nature? Can we design buildings that store carbon rather than release it through cement? Can we house wildlife rather than create wildlife deserts? Can we cycle the water rather than be flooded by flash flooding? Can we cool the air on a hot day rather than be an urban heat island? Biomimicry invites us to redesign, in some of the ways I was showing earlier, our cities so that they are as generous as nature and they function as nature and make us far more resilient to the impacts that we know that are coming. These are the local aspirations of place, thriving people in a locally thriving place, but we need to put that in context of global responsibility. And for me, this is particularly important when I'm speaking with countries and places of the global north that may be doing very well on local people thriving and local ecology thriving, but have a massive impact on the whole world. So let's move to thinking, how can our city respect the health of the whole planet? We're aware that products that are on sale worldwide maybe have been produced on the other side of the world in any country and are having impacts worldwide. We're also aware that every country may be that place where those impacts are happening, and at the end of a global supply chain of exports and extraction going elsewhere in the world. So how do we enable ourselves to connect the impact of consumption on impacts worldwide? This is the realm of planetary boundaries. How do we bring ourselves back within planetary boundaries, or develop in ways that meet people's needs without now moving to putting excessive pressure on those boundaries? How do we transform towards circular, low carbon economies? And thinking about our global connection, how do we respect the well-being of people worldwide? Actions and decisions taken in every country impact people in many, many other countries, whether it's through global supply chains, whether it's through the current impacts of climate breakdown, or through cultural connections, the possibility of connecting and building solidarity, whether it's impact of the culture of impact on migrants, the policy of welcome, the culture of welcome, or through global policy regimes, national policies that impact on others. This invites us to bring our awareness to the way that we live here and how it impacts on people worldwide. So we have the 4 lenses that we call. These make up a city portrait, or indeed a state level or regional or town or neighborhood portrait of a place. They invite us to take account of all of the different kinds of impacts, social and ecological, we could be having. And we can either create a portrait of a place, say, what is the state of this place, and gather indicators and set targets on every one of these dimensions. We can also use it to explore a particular theme in a place. For example, thinking about our city's future of water in the face of climate change, or the future of food, of energy, of housing, of transport here. How do we design that, thinking about its impact in all of these 4 quadrants? We've seen through experience that places using this design with a more holistic frame, it can act even as a check to make sure we take account of those, thinking about different ways of designing to be social and ecological throughout. I want to give some examples of places that have chosen to use these tools. And I should say that all of them are in the commons. They are freely available for any place to choose, to use, to adapt. We ask only that people share back, because we know that some of the richest insights come from learning of what others have done. You can see here also, this is predominantly started in the global north in Europe. I think there's been peer-to-peer inspiration across Europe when it began in Amsterdam in 2020. But also there are places around the world pioneering it in many different contexts. And again, Ipoh is there on the map in Malaysia, and Jamila will be speaking of that soon. So let me just talk you through a few examples. Glasgow is a city in Scotland, in the UK, that recently drew up its first vision. They've started saying, what would it mean for us to thrive here? So they've been through that process of asking all those questions from the local and the global perspective. And they started to, as you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, show the overshoot of the city. Now, these aren't pretty statistics. This is a place facing up to its global ecological impact, and then setting targets to say, we must act to come back within this impact. The city of Barcelona in Spain has done a full donut. You can see on the left, they've quantified it inside and out. They unrolled it and then re-rolled it. And they're using this concept as part of a much bigger transformation they're making in the city to bring about a culture of sustainability. In the photograph at the top, you can see this used to be a crossroad, an intersection full of traffic jams. But the government of Barcelona have removed the cars, or made them polite visitors around the edge, and put parks in and playgrounds and communal spaces. So they've brought back the urban commons and nature and moved out the car. And this is transforming the spaces of the city. In Cornwall, a county in the UK, they decided to turn the concept into a decision-making wheel on the left. So any infrastructural project that they are planning on doing, they run through the donut lens and ask themselves, how can we improve it? And where is it having negative impact? What more could it do? And on the right-hand side, they've set a plan for transforming Cornwall by 2050. You can see that they're monitoring themselves over time. And just from the colors of the traffic light nature of the green, red, and yellow, you can see how Cornwall is currently getting better, where it's not changing, where things are still getting worse. And that's a much richer feedback than telling you, for example, Cornwall's GDP grew by 1.3% last year. What would that actually tell us? What was bought and what was sold? This tells us about life in its own metrics, the human outcomes and the ecological outcomes. And I believe dashboards like these will be the metrics we choose to live by if we are to thrive in the 21st century. Thimphu in Bhutan, the government of Bhutan wanted to use the Doughnut together with their concept of gross national happiness to reimagine the future of the capital city, which has begun to sprawl, and they want to redesign and bring it back within their ecological understanding of Bhutan as a nation that focuses on gross national happiness and ecological thriving. And the cartoons on the left show a vision from there of what does it look like to thrive here in the future? What is our concept to which we put the Doughnut in service to this future? In Ipoh, Malaysia, Asia's first city aiming to live in the Doughnut. I won't say much here because I know Jamila's going to talk about this, but I was privileged to be there at these first workshops, exploring with some of the mayors, looking at what would it mean for Ipoh to aim to thrive? Where are we now? And what is the transformation we want to bring about? And let me wrap up and say that if any of these ideas are interesting, my colleague has created a report called Cities and Regions, Let's Get Started, that documents the very different ways that we are learning from how cities and places are starting to put these ideas into practice. We are in a learning relationship with places and pioneers worldwide who are showing us what it means as a policymaker, as a local government, as a local business, as a community leader, to take ideas off the page and start putting them into practice, even when you may be surrounded by a national or international context that, of course, is creating many dynamics that are cutting against this transformation. Still, we get started. Let me finish here. All of the ideas and the tools that I've shared are available on our platform, doughuteconomics.org. But I'm really delighted that today I'm joined by Jamila, because it's very important to me that even though I'm sharing these concepts and I'm aware I'm sitting here in the UK, which is a very different context and reality of the world, to bring in somebody who has been pioneering this work in Malaysia. So as Zainab generously introduced Jamila earlier, Tan Sri Jamila Mahmood is the executive director of the Sunway Center for Planetary Health at Sunway University in Malaysia. She was formerly a special advisor to the Prime Minister of Malaysia during the COVID crisis, because she's a highly respected medical health practitioner and has worked internationally on conflict, on disaster, and on health issues globally. So, and is also an amazing pioneer of what it could take and mean to put Doughnut economics into practice in Malaysia. So let me hand over to you, Jamila, as part of this co-note that we're doing together, and to talk about the reality where you are.
Thank you very much, Kate. Assalamualaikum. Good afternoon, friends in Pakistan. Really delighted to be here. Thank you, Kate, for inviting me to, speak as well. Really, so much credit goes to Kate. She's not just developed such a wonderful model of regenerative economics, but Kate is so compelling, and you learn so much when you're with her. So today, what I'd like to do in a few minutes is to share with you how Malaysia, or a city in Malaysia, decided to adopt Doughnut economics, and share with you, the real challenges, or rather the steps that we took to get to where we are, and how what are the things we learned, so that hopefully you can apply as well to your own context and settings. So, Sarah, I have to share screen now. Give me a minute. Here we are. Okay. Okay, so the city we selected to pilot is called Ipoh. And the reason why we selected Ipoh is because we felt that we couldn't start with a large city. Ipoh is the third largest city in West Malaysia, and it is also about the same size as Amsterdam in terms of area size, but also in terms of population. So inspired by Amsterdam, we decided that maybe we try with Ipoh. The other reason why we selected Ipoh is that it has quite enlightened leadership in the state. And, it's always easy when you have connections with the leadership there. Now, just to share with you that, what we sat with the state officials to say, okay, how do you reimagine Ipoh? And they identified, 3 key areas: a city that has its own identity as a donut city, which includes, looking at regenerative economics through the lenses of all its other former and current identities and bringing that into one vision. So, that includes innovation, heritage and culture, a smart city using technology, an affordable city, and a green city. It also prioritizes it being a city for all generations, intergenerational, affordable for young people to thrive, because typically Ipoh has quite an older population. It's a little bit of a sleepy town, people go there to retire. And what we did was that all these aspirations and reimagining Ipoh are not new. They are in line with the state plans itself. This is in Bahasa Malaysia, Rancangan Struktur, but it's basically what it means is that level 2 kind of ambition on how you look at development in the state. And what they wanted to ensure was there was minimal out-of-city migration, because people would move to Kuala Lumpur, the capital, for jobs and so forth, provide inclusive, affordable housing for retirees, but also improve marketability of the workforce. And I think this was improved by creating of a fast train that can take people from Ipoh to Kuala Lumpur in under 2 hours. So, and that made it a much more affordable city to live and commute from. It also wants to be a city that leads, becoming the first city in Asia to actually adopt the Doughnut economic model and inspiring other cities in the country as well. And the local plans, Rancangan Tempatan Ipoh 2020 and the state plan of 2040, are already geared towards sustainable development. So it was a natural fit. So the Doughnut economic model leverages on Ipoh's strengths, but helps it operate it more effectively and provides the international edge for the city. So using the 4 lenses that Kate mentioned earlier, we looked at, the 4 dimensions, 2x4 dimensions, and, we mapped out with the city, municipality and state officials, what would it mean for the people of the Kinta Valley, or rather Ipoh, to thrive? And they identified a few areas: ecotourism, good public transportation, public green spaces, and so forth. And in the ecological space around biodiversity support, waste management, energy harvesting, culture and heritage, and disaster risk reduction. So minimizing risk. At a global level, really look at peace and justice, equity and equality, and sustainably conscious society. And, being also at the ecological level is about reducing air pollution, climate consciousness, and reducing impact on climate change, and sustainable forest management. So as Kate mentioned, we met in Oxford, Kate. There's a picture from the time we launched 2040 film. And we sat with the officials there. And you see in this photograph, actually, there's some very senior people. This is Kate's book, actually was on the table. And you see, this is the mayor. These are all the state officials. And we really sat down and drilled down. And just as you can see, everyone's still wearing a mask because it was post-COVID. And, initially what we thought is that, we as a Center for Planetary Health, what we would do is actually be their knowledge partner. How do we document their milestones and achievements? How do we keep encouraging them? How do we help them build indicators and so forth? But also support them in capacity development, looking at how do you, roll out the Doughnut, how do you train the staff and so forth. Now, to our surprise, after doing this a couple of times, what was very clear was there was such good buy-in from the city council, and they became very impatient. And they said, enough, we want to now go to the ground, and we want to make sure that things can now actually happen on the ground. So my lesson number one is that in the initial stages, it's very important to get top leadership, and you drive the top-down approach to driving an innovative regenerative project like this. But at the end of the day, the bottom-up approach is very important. Getting communities, getting people to actually then drive it, and this is what we are now embarking on. Really focusing on now going down to community level, guiding the officials to get that community engagement, very early on, and pushing it. In many cities, communities are active on their own. I look at, for example, being in Birmingham, watching what they're doing is really exciting, starting very community-centered. But in many cities around Asia, sometimes, the state itself or the city council itself has to you have to get their buy-in first before you can move anything at community level. So I think you need a bit of a balance, yin-yang kind of approach, that you get the buy-in and then get the community to drive it further. So I think this is how we're doing. And then, how do you measure impact? So next steps, we are already doing the city portrait in action. We're going to start measuring, where the shortfalls, overshoots are, as in previous slides that Kate has shown. We want to inspire the leadership, because I think once they get excited, they can actually drive it on their own, and we just support and keep going. Now, to our also surprise, many other mayors started to get envious and approached the mayor of Ipoh to say, how come you were chosen? Today itself, we had lunch with one of the state crown prince, and who said, but I want regenerative economics in my state. And so he spent some time looking at the Ipoh Doughnut model, or the regenerative economic model. So I suspect that, we will get other cities in the country now coming to us to say, we want to embrace this. So I think what we want to do is make sure we do it right with Ipoh. And we've been, my team has been also actively participating on the local regional city portraits and the tools, the blue book that Kate showed earlier. And I think this is an excellent resource. I think that, the bottom line is every city is different. You've got to really, feel, what is really important in that city. Make sure you touch on things that are quite emotive as well, the culture, the history, and also, being able to allow them to have a vision and envision and imagine, what could be. Ipoh, I want to mention from the start, was actually a city that was built on tin mining. So there are, parts of Ipoh basically that have been degraded, but now, regenerated. Some of the disused mining pools are now converted into ecotourism sites. It's now also, taking its music culture quite seriously. So it's getting a UNESCO heritage kind of acknowledgement for its street music and so forth. So I think you've got to also make it quite fun and exciting for local authorities. So I think I'll pause here, Kate, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kate and Dr. Jamila, for wonderful presentations. And we do have a few questions, but keeping in the interest of time, I'll just take one or two questions. So I think so yes, we have one question from the audience.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kate and Dr. Jamila. It was really wonderful learning this concept of donut economics. But to me, with the current state of economy in, say, Pakistan, or the map shown by Kate, which shows I would safely say 80% of the cities which are practicing this concept of donut economics located in Europe. So I was just wondering that through the last centuries, the way European countries, they colonized the rest of the world, is it really a surprise for us that we see only one Ipoh or maybe Thimphu in Bhutan, which are practicing this concept, and almost none in Africa, where basically all these resources are located, and they should actually start practicing it because they could very easily be self-sufficient. And then Dr. Jamila also talked about peace and equity and harmony. So I'm not sure how could such utopian concepts fit into the overall donut economics. Can you shed some light on that? Thank you.
I'll jump in. Thank you so much for this question. It's an excellent question. As I showed on that map, and I agree with you, the vast number of cities and places that are so far practicing the donut economics model are indeed located in Europe. Several reasons for that. One, partly because I'm a British woman writing a book that was published in the English language. And so the donut model came out in English first in this context. And the city of Amsterdam was the first place that said, we actually want to do this. And it's very clear to me from watching the practice that it's there's peer-to-peer inspiration. So when Amsterdam launched their Donut City portrait in the middle of the COVID crisis, it took just 6 weeks for the city of Copenhagen, which sees itself as a bit of a rival with Amsterdam, to launch their own process of looking at it. And so it spreads amongst like places. But I'll also add there that I feel there's a responsibility on places in the global north to act first and take that leadership, because these are the places, as we saw in the scatter plot, that are massively overshooting planetary boundaries and have the first obligation to reduce their impact in the living world and to move towards a regenerative economy. So it's begun there. For me, a question is, to what extent is it useful for other places? And we are offering it and adapting it and working with places, as with Jamila in Ipoh, to say, how can it become useful in your context? What does it take? If it's not useful, don't use it. If it's useful, let's adapt it together and make it as useful as possible. Let me pass to Jamila to comment on that.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, but I also feel that embracing regenerative economics actually is very good for the economy. I'm going to answer this question also with the question that was posted in the Q&A, which asked about, with these in the absence of sustainable ESG regulation, right? How do you urge private sector in relinquishing profit? I don't think you want to tell private sector to relinquish profits per se. I think you need to get them to make or rather be successful while embracing sustainability and so forth, because a sustainable private sector is one that will ensure that we are still alive to be their consumers and their clients. So I think this whole notion that if you are going to be successful, you cannot, if you want to be sustainable, you cannot create profits. I think all private sector will abandon this idea of regenerative economics. I think that is what we've been discussing here right now in Malaysia, where I'm co-chairing the Planetary Health Summit, and in fact the whole topic tomorrow will be on healthy finance. Now, in terms of the developing world, I think that first of all, I think Kate and the Donut Economic Action Lab has started to translate a number of the books into different languages, right, including Indonesian languages and so forth. I think that the more this gets out to people to read, and when we took on the challenge to convince one of our cities to embrace donut economics and regenerative economic models, it was really also to be a model and a pilot, and to show the rest of the middle income countries, where we are one of them, that it is possible. It's not just the developed countries that can actually do this. And I think that for many countries in Africa and in Asia, if you talk about Vietnam, for example, if you look at their from the Good Life Index, they don't cross a lot of the ecological ceiling, but they have some gaps in the social foundations. And it is now emerging as one of the fastest growing economies in the region. This is an opportunity to tell them, make them aware that as you develop, be aware that you need to protect your ecological ceiling. And believe it or not, when I talk to some of the leaders from Vietnam and in government, and I asked them, what do you worry about the most? And they said climate change and how we are going to minimize our impact on climate change. So I think even in the middle income countries and the developing world, they are very much aware that they need to get their development models right. The more we can show that it can be done in the global south, I think the better.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we have another question, but just last question because we have to end the session. And before Aruj, you ask question. So there was one question from from Dr. Waqar Ahmed from SDPI, and I think pretty much that's answered. He asks, how do you respond to skeptics who argue that prioritizing social and environmental goals may hinder economic growth? So that was his question. I think that's pretty much answered. I'll now ask Aruj. She has one question, and after that we'll be ending the session. Over to you, Aruj.
Thank you, Kate and Dr. Jamila, for a very interesting presentation. My question is that based on what you presented, my understanding is that the Doughnut model has to be customized on an area-to-area basis. So for maximized impact. So how do we integrate it in countries where the local governments are underdeveloped or unempowered?
So first of all, to say thank you for that question. Absolutely, it's adapted from place to place, as the examples I showed from Bhutan and as what Jamila has shown from Ipoh. Can you just say again, what do you mean? How do we integrate it when the local government can you state more specifically the context so that we really respond to your question?
So in areas where local governments are not really empowered, or they are underdeveloped, or they do not have the right resources, or they have some sort of constraints. So how do we reach out to them? How do we integrate the Doughnut model in those countries?
Okay, I'll give a beginning of an answer, and I'm sure Jamila will have more to add. So I showed you all examples where cities and local governments are introducing the concept, but it's also being introduced by community level groups or organizations that are saying in the case where the local government doesn't want to do it or isn't initiating it, it's being introduced by the community first. That's one response. There are many different ways of starting to do this work. You can do it in a very data rich way, which is intensive to gather the data about the state of the local place, or you can do it almost in a workshop where you can literally print out or redraw the diagrams that we've shown and use it literally just as a way of thinking. It can just be used as a different way of thinking, bringing that into the room so that you can start to have a workshop that brings out the ideas in your room. And I want to finish with the point you made. It absolutely is adapted local place to place. But Jamila, do you want to say something more about that? Because I think you may see that kind of context more.
When we talk about regenerative economies, the Doughnut economic model, to even to indigenous people, right, and to what we might perceive as less developed or less educated, they identify with it through their own cultural roots and heritage. For example, Malaysia, as you know, is predominantly a Muslim country, and when we talk to people here, they say, well, this is what our faith tells us to do. Everything in moderation, that we have to protect the environment, that we have to be kind to each other. We can't just think about ourselves. So I think that, you'd be surprised how you can it's how you frame the conversation, right? It's about how you approach it, not just, you've got to present it in a way that is culturally appropriate and more easily understood by them. And then many of them will say, well, this is actually what we need to be doing because our culture and our faith and, whatever, it dictates us to behave in this way. Then it's easy to get the conversation going. And again, as, Kate mentioned, it is very contextual. So, what might be done in Amsterdam or Brussels maybe totally, not ready in Ipoh. But, whatever we can do, we build it step by step. So if you see what I presented earlier, we have identified only a few things in each of the boxes because we don't want to overwhelm the city. So once we achieve that, then they now are already telling us, oh, but we have to add this, we have to add that. So when they're confident with the model and when they feel that, they're ready to take on more, because with everything that's new, there's a little bit of fear of whether, is it something that we can do? Is it going to succeed, particularly if you're governments, because there's a political, price, right, in actually trying to implement something that might not succeed. So I think step by step, sometimes you have to take baby steps, sometimes you have to take bigger steps, but pace it, it's not a race. You have to take it at your own pace, your own context. And the most important is get people excited about it and celebrate every little win. Every little time that they achieve something, we really applaud them, we encourage them, we tell people, make a big deal out of it. So they feel really confident to push on.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Dr. Jamila and Kate. So before we conclude, I think the concept is, as you mentioned, it needs to be translated in different languages so that the people in different countries are able to better comprehend. But I believe, Kate, I also saw on the social media page of Doughnut Economics Action Lab that they're looking for a small group of people to research, interview, and write short business case studies. So we do have young researchers here at SDPI, and SDPI is playing an instrumental role in building capacities of local governments and also connecting with the parliamentarians, bringing new concepts. So I think the researchers here would definitely be interested in writing down the case studies, linking the concept here, how it can be implemented, and also we'll be happy to connect further to engage the local government, especially as Dr. Jamila's presentation, it was very clear that capacity building programs were conducted with local partners, and only then they were able to, talk about how they can enforce or implement it. So I believe capacity building is also important along with knowledge transfer before we get the word out. And for this specific lecture, we are, as being SDPI, the word will be out tomorrow as part of the press release. So the masses will be able to understand what was the crux of the discussion that we just had here. And then we also had this lecture live on our socials. We'll also request both of you to share your presentations with us so that we can share with our partner organizations. Thank you once again, and I hope not just us but you also had a good experience delivering the lecture. Thank you. I know there are so many questions in the by the online participants as well on social media as well, but keeping in interest of time, Kate is also very active on social media. Dr. Jamila is quite busy nowadays with the summit, but I believe you do check your social media, so you will be answering some questions that people have in context of Doughnut economics. Thank you so much. Have a good evening, good day.
Thank you. Real pleasure to join you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.